5:31 PI. I'm William Terite. It's 7:36. Brilliant to have your company this Friday. Now, the government has unveiled a string of pre-budget announcements in recent weeks ahead of the big reveal next week, of course. Now, initiatives announced so far include a new social investment fund designed to transform the way the social services are delivered to vulnerable Kiwis. The coalition is also pumping $140 million into a new truancy attendance service to get on top of chronic truancy. But it was also revealed the government's making changes to the pay equity scheme, tightening up the eligibility. Here to debate that and more is the leader of the Pacific Blues, John Loau, and Manaaki Rangatahi spokesperson, Brooke Pao Stanley. Good morning to you both. Thanks for your time.
Good morning. Thank you.
Look, let's start with arguably the most controversial of the announcements announced in recent weeks, the pay equity changes. Rightfully so. You know, on both sides of the debate, there is an argument around this. I'll start with you, Brooke. What do you make of the changes?
I think this government is making, I don't agree with the changes. I think that it's reflective of many of the changes that this government is making actually across many different sectors and spaces in our communities, making it harder for people to prove that historically their work has been undervalued. And especially in workforces that are dominated by women, I think it sends a really clear message that work done by women is undervalued. It further entrenches that worldview, but also I think we should be opening up the conversation to talk about what is work, moving forward in a rapidly changing world where we have AI and lots of different crises that we're all experiencing at the moment. I think it's also an opportunity for us to think about aspirationally, what does it mean for us to all have what we need to look after ourselves. And I think, historically, I've been with Auckland Action Against Poverty and I'm with Manaaki Rangatahi now, but in that space and with my work with AAAP, and even now, actually, it's connected. The idea of work and what people are doing needs to be redefined, I think. There are many people in our communities that are doing work that isn't formally recognized by the system. And so, moving forward, I think, there is space for us to open up what that means. So,
Yeah, certainly. Look, I'll bring you into it now. John, what do you make of the changes? I mean, and perhaps your rebuttal to what Brooke had to say.
Yeah, well, first of all, good morning to you, Will, and everyone else out there listening here at PMN. And Brooke, very nice to meet you. Just want to make a correction. The new chair of Pacific Blues is Liz Canetti, but
Right.
I'm part of the wider committee. But it's still a privilege to be here and discuss these issues and all the important ones. I think one of the important things is to remember from a pay equity, discussion is that the changes that have been made, based on what the government has announced, is just about clarifying the process. And the Nationals, put through the first pay equity scheme and put that in place, and all they're doing is clarifying, making sure that the pay equity system just works better. Than they budgeted money and probably more money set aside with the anticipation that they are anticipating that other pay equity claims are going to be put through, and the government is encouraging women and others to put their claims through. So I think some of the narrative around this, where the government doesn't care or they don't believe in in protecting women's rights to pay is kind of getting muddled out there. So pay equity is different from equal pay. That's enshrined in law, that's protected in law, and those aren't the same thing. So I think just clarifying the pay equity system is what the government has done and continues to do, because the last 12 pay equity settlements that are already been settled, and to date there's no changes there. So we were having this discussion earlier this week with some people who were asking the questions around this, and I just said to them, point to someone that has lost their pay since the changes have made. That's a woman, and no one can point that out. So I think they're just clarifying that what the government has done has clarified that system, so it's just a little more clear than what was put in place after the last Labour government made changes to it in 2020.
Look, perhaps it is clearer, and we had the Prime Minister talking about it this week on the show. I mean, inevitably, though, put simply, for those listening, you can call it a clear change, etc., but it is tightening up the the parameters of that, which inevitably means it just makes things that wee bit harder. What do you make of those comments, Brooke?
Yeah, I think we should also be aware that 33 claims that have been put forward by different unions and which represent thousands of workers actually have been binned. And so I think to say that they're trying to clarify the process and ensure that using this narrative of saving money, but looking to all the places in which actually money we need that money needs to stay invested in these communities. They're taking money away from communities that are already marginalized, already at a disadvantage, already in work that is underpaid and undervalued and in low wage work. I think kind of speaks to this wider narrative that they're about their agenda, which is actually just protecting wealth, looking to introduce privatization of services across the board, and actually making living conditions extremely harder for those communities that I mentioned.
Hmm. John, what do you say to that in terms of the criticism perhaps of this government's agenda?
I think one of the things that we recognize and Labour inevitably recognize, and former Prime Minister Chris Hipkins recognized at their last party retreat, is that some of their decisions around the government expenditure not only contributed to inflation, but also contributed to the cost of living and the pressures that our community and the rest of the country are under. And that was quite a stark reflection on his end, but it's a bit little too late when everyone was telling them that the spending that they were doing was a bit out of control, and somebody's going to have to pay for it at some point, and there's going to be no money in the account. What we have now is a new government in place who've come in and looked at the books and decided, well, like everyone else who has to balance the checkbook at home, that there isn't enough money in the account to do everything that we need to do. So where can we go from here? And so, yes, I recognize that we would like to see money put in other places and other programs, but unfortunately we have to balance these books. It's not fair for government to tell everyone else to tighten their belts, which is what we heard from Grant Robertson and everyone else, to tighten your belts, and then they went out and spent millions and billions of dollars on programs and other things. It just didn't make any sense at the time. And so, yes, if you look at inflation at the time, 7.5%, 8%, it's down to 2.5. We're seeing the OCR cut all the way down toward 3.5. We're expecting another cut coming as well. These are things that are going to take time to have the impact. So, do we recognize that we're all under pressure? Yes. I mean, even myself, I feel it too. And,
Yeah.
I think there's this narrative that the national government and the current government in place is about protecting money and keeping it for the wealthy. What they're doing is dealing with the money that currently comes in, their revenue take, forecasting that and saying, right, in order to balance the books, we have to have a plan in place and ensure that taxpayers can see, we're prioritizing that to then make sure that when we are back in the black, that we can look at those other things as well. But I don't think it's fair that the narrative out there is that we're just here to protect our mates and all those other things, when no, there's only so much money that comes into the government's tax take. That's how it makes its revenue, and they have to be responsible for the way that spends. And so different governments, different parties have a view on how that money is prioritized and spent out. But at the end of the day, everybody can admit that the books aren't balanced, and we have to have them balanced as soon as possible.
Brooke,
I think, can I just add, sorry, I think there's a real misconception and about the way in which we talk about the government's books and we compare it to household budgets. I think that's a really misinterpretation, and it's a really bad comparison, actually, because the government books and family household budget books are extremely different. Government has access to money that we don't have access to. They can also, their credit ratings, the government credit ratings at the moment are actually really good, which means it puts us in a good position to be able to borrow money. And they did borrow money, and they gave that money to landlords for tax, to be able to claim taxes on rent. And also the way in which government can, when they borrow money and then have to pay it back. They can pay it back at a longer term. They can take a while to pay it back, because what they do is they legislate taxes into our laws. And so I think making that comparison, we shouldn't be making that comparison, because it gives us the idea and pushes the idea that the government spending is exactly the same as spending within our households. And that's not true at all, actually. And they keep using this narrative to say, we need to balance the books, we need to save money, we need to do all of these things to justify taking money from communities that need it the most. And so I just wanted to make that clarification and introduce that into, I guess we need to start thinking about things very differently. I think the government can't, they always fall back on this excuse that, we don't have any money. And that's not true, actually. The government can access all the money and resources they need, actually. And that was evident during COVID, when things literally changed overnight, when they were able to house everybody, when they introduced services at a different level, at a high trust level, when they actually implemented the wage subsidy, everybody got wages. So I think, I don't believe, and we shouldn't believe this justification and this idea that the government's broke, that they need to balance their books. They're all goods, actually, and we're all goods. New Zealand was in a really good position to borrow, and they have borrowed. This government has borrowed money. Let's be really clear about that. They've borrowed money and gave that money to landlords. So I think,
as a landlord,
taking money from
as a landlord, I don't think that the narrative that that they just give it to their mates and their landlord. Like, there are many Pacific people who are landlords like myself, and when those tax breaks and those things come into place to help take pressure off of of people like me, I don't look at that and go, oh no, I shouldn't take that. I look at my situation and think, thank goodness that's there to help alleviate the pressure. So there's this narrative
that's the thing,
that
not
the
many.
Pacific
Did
people
you know
aren't
that
landlords. So
but
that's
Pacific
just not
people
true.
has the lowest. Actually, Pacific people are the lowest in terms of home ownership. We are the lowest group in Aotearoa, actually. So I don't want to be but you're a minority within the Pacific community if you own your own house and you're a landlord.
And really, the focus should
I
be
think
increasing that number. Really, that should be the focus. It's about increasing the number,
it
right?
should be.
So,
but how are we going to do that given the current state of our wages? I mean, we're just talking about the pay equity bill. They're just making it harder to prove, and they're making the criteria harder and eligibility harder to prove that work that has been historically undervalued needs to be at the same rate. We look at where
we
money
do value
from.
that work. Look, I think we do value that work, and I recognize and I accept that in the past, many parties and many governments have undervalued women in all sorts of sectors, especially the ones where they dominated. I think it's about clarifying that stuff. So to take a librarian and compare them to, the work of an engineer, and saying, well, because of this disparity, we require pay parity and equity in this space. I just don't think that's a good approach. So should we clarify things? Absolutely. That just makes sense. So I just don't, for me anyway, I just don't see the issue there.
No, I think more than that, though, that's why it's important that we should talk about work, actually, because you talk about work like an engineer and a librarian as if in some ways that work is, it's not equal, actually, and that therefore these are the justifications that the system uses to ensure that some people get paid more than others. And that's not based on existence, actually, of us, and it's not based on people's time. And I want to bring COVID into the conversation again, because during COVID, we saw that the people that were needed the most during a crisis is actually essential workers. And how much money are essential workers being paid? And how much do we value that work? We don't. And that's reflected in their pay. They're the hardest working people that we have in our communities, doing some of the most laboursome work, and they get paying the least amount of money. And the people that are getting paid the most amount of money do the least amount of work. they're people that sit at the top in managerial positions and boss positions. They get the most amount of money, and yet they're not essential when we have a crisis. In terms of their work, it isn't essential. We don't need
Yeah.
them.
That's arguable. Okay.
Do you want to argue the point then?
Well, I mean, just I was an essential worker, yeah, during that time as well as part of the COVID response. So, to say, well, those who are sitting at the top table, and or have a certain salary is not essential to the work industry or the economy in general. I'm a bit dumbfounded by that. How do we determine who's not essential then to the space?
That's what I'm saying. Let's talk about actually work. We need to move away from work, because that's where we start to place value on ourselves and each other, on the work that we do instead of our existence. I'm sorry, but I don't exist here by the grace of this government. So why then should they determine what I get paid and what I am worth? Why does somebody else in this society get to determine what I'm worth? And that's beyond my work. All of us are beyond what we do, actually.
So that's an employer-employee relationship discussion.
No, it's not this is what this bill is about work. But I'm saying we need to open that up to ensure that everybody has what they need to look after themselves. At the moment, people that are doing, like I said, community work, care work, especially if we just look at being mums or parents, that work isn't even paid. And yet that work is some of the most essential work that holds our communities together. And that's not paid at all. And so that's what I'm saying. We have this idea that some work is more valuable than others, and that then justifies these people get paid more than others, but it also entrenches the idea of superiority in our communities, and that money is the most important thing based on what you're worth. And I'm saying, how can we say that? How can we determine what people are worth, actually, and what their work is worth, when all of us are doing something to contribute to keeping our communities together? And all I'm saying is that this government is pushing through legislation and making decisions that actually further divide and entrench these divisions within our communities.
Well, 100% agree. Mothers, obviously, one of the hardest, if not the hardest job, in the world. But it's just like, how do we pay them then? It's how do we get to that point?
I'm going to turn the conversation just more generally to the upcoming budget next week. Just very quickly, I know we've got to go to an ad break, but initiatives announced, like I said, the coalition's pumping $140 million into truancy, and then they've also announced a new social investment fund. With that in mind, just very brief comments from both of you. I mean, do you have much hope for next week's budget, Brooke? I mean, we've already heard from Nicola that this will not be a lolly scramble.
No, I don't have hope, actually, from this government and any governments, actually. That kind of stays with the people in our communities. I think that we need to be really clear moving forward. We all need to think about this, actually, that we need people in decision-making spaces that lead from their heart. I think about Te Tiriti and the way in which the Toitu movement mobilized all of us around Aotearoa, all of us from so many different communities, and how we should keep that at the center of what we want to dream for, that our aspirations should be high, and that the values of leadership is really important, and that the spirit in which that was signed, about sharing, about caring, about safety and security, should be at the forefront of decision making, policies, actions from people in positions of power, and those of us, actually all of us. So
yeah. And now, John, just, I mean, what are you expecting from next week's budget?
Yeah, I mean, the government's pretty clear in their plan. So I looked at the social investment, fund that they've got going on with the new social investment agency. I'm hopeful, always hopeful, regardless of who's in office, they're going to do well for our people. You know, the plan is to target 20 different initiatives and data-driven and evidence-based investments, and it gives the opportunity for the new social investment agency to work collaboratively with our communities, Pacific agencies, iwi, to help design and drive, you know, the changes that we need, and to invest in those, especially those niche areas that we need. So I'm quite hopeful that the budget will lay out a clear plan for the next year or two, so that we can, you know, like I said, just get the economy moving where we need it. So it just takes pressure off everyone.
Get the country back on track, as Christopher Luxon likes to say. Thank you very much to both of you. That is Manaaki Rangatahi spokesperson Brooke Pao Stanley and former chair of the Pacific Blues, John Loau. You both have a lovely weekend when you get to it. I really appreciate your
Thanks
time.
Thanks.